We will stand on principle, or we will not stand at all.
Thank you, Alexandre Kateb, for being here. Hi, everyone. This is Thierry Arys Ruiz here again for a new podcast on Principle Discord, the podcast that tries to establish the principles that work and help you understand better the system as it is today. Today, we're joined by Alexandre Kateb, who is the founder of the Multipolarity Report. He also happens to be a professor at Sciences Po Paris. So, Alexandre, thank you for being here and welcome.
Thank you, Thierry, for having me on this podcast.
So, Alexandre, can you tell us for the audience a little bit more about you and what your double hat, what are you focusing at the moment?
Sure. I am an economist. I have a background in financial economics. I worked at the French Central Bank for some years. Then I also worked for the financial industry as an economist, strategist, and a consultant on diverse issues. And I am mostly interested in financial and monetary economics. As of late, I founded a website and research service, which is called the Multipolarity Report, in which I develop my views and my research on global macro issues and geopolitics, and which builds heavily on my professional experience and on my thesis on the move toward a multipolar world, a post-Western, post-American world, in which new rising powers like China, like Russia, like India are defining the global agenda. And this is really the credo that supports all this research effort.
So, polarization is a word that we hear a lot recently. When did you find your multipolarity report?
Yes, that's correct, Thierry. Polarization is really what is at the heart of this new world order, which is based on the rivalities between the incumbent powers, mostly the United States, which defined the world in which we are living today, following World War II, all the system, the geopolitical, the monetary system that we are living today, and the emerging powers like China, but also Russia, which is a re-emerging power, so to say, India and Brazil, the BRICS, which are redefining or trying to redefine this global order and trying to bring new rules which are more inclusive, so to say, and which also reflect the evolving balances of power at the geopolitical and at the economic and financial levels.
Right. So the word polarization, I think, works also at the macro and at the micro level. We say polarization in politics. We see polarization in the haves and the have-nots. And overall, this is kind of a recipe for conflict. How do you see this polarization playing out in the next couple of years?
Well, I think you are right to mention the fact that conflict is really at the heart of this dynamic. And it is natural because you have a new power, new superpower like China, which is trying to gain more prominence in the system and trying to tweak the rules, so to say, the hegemony of the United States and the Western world. So this inevitably can lead to conflicts if the rules are not changed to accommodate this rise of the new powers. I think the main argument here is that we need really to change the rule in a proactive fashion and to be very forward-looking in the world that we are living and that we want to live in in 20 or 30 years from now. And this is the only way for me to prevent this conflict from turning into something that could be really ugly and that could remind the last global military conflicts that the world has gone through in the 20th century, for example.
Right. So the name of the game is consensus or confrontation. Alexandre, you will be part of the event, monetaryreset.net, as part of an expert, precisely speaking about central banks, central bank digital currencies, and how those that play within the balance of powers in geopolitics. One of the big questions that are asked is, does it really make sense for central banks to implement those decentralized systems, since they are by definition central and centralized central banks? You yourself have a lot of familiarity with Banque de France, and so what is your perspective? Given your expertise on what would be your advice, or where do you see the opportunities and the threat of central bank digital currencies?
Yes, well, thank you. Yeah, it's a very new and fast developing, topic and field. Obviously, the CBDC's area. I think the main point here is that central banks have been quite resistant to this new financial innovation that we have seen come over the last decade, and especially the cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and the like, which were perceived as a challenge for central banks, control over monetary power, so to say. This was actually at the margins of the system, these cryptocurrencies. But then you have a player like Facebook, which has announced that it will roll out its own digital currency. And
that's
given
right.
that Facebook has many billions users and members, it gives you an idea of the impact that
it's kind of like a country on its own, right? So
right.
If you have many billions of users, it's almost like you have the power of controlling to a certain extent an economy within an economy.
Exactly, you have a massive power. You can write your own rules. And you can also define your own monetary policy. You can, for example, start to afford credits and loans to your users in your own currency, digital currency, and this means that you have basically the power of money creation. So you are really challenging the central banks in the very essence of their, mission.
That's right.
Yeah.
So one of the questions, because in this podcast we like to speak about principles,
yes.
And one of the principles that this puts into question is who is to issue currencies. We see from the theories of Hayek, like the Hayek Bank, where you have private money that has evolved into a central bank system, a fractional reserve system, and a different setup of another type of banking system since the creation of the Federal Reserves in the 1920s. Now, how do you see this questioning this authority? And then also, is there any difference whatsoever when it comes to sovereignty, given that the idea at first was to have an independent central bank from politicizing money, right? And then, unfortunately, what we see today is precisely money being politicized again, be it for trade wars, currency wars, or even within the country to monetize the money. So one of the questions I want to ask is, today, most Western central banks, except from the PBOC, who's absolutely public, are also private entities. So what would be the difference between a Facebook issuing a currency or a bunch of coders issuing Bitcoin and a central bank?
Well, first, you really mentioned that throughout history there has been a kind of a struggle between sovereign entities, states and treasuries, and then central banks on one side, and private players on the other side. Actually, the private players have always existed. For example, during the Renaissance period, you had the rise of private bankers in Italy, in Switzerland, in Flanders.
That's right.
Those private bankers, actually, they were the first ones to issue, paper currencies. These were indeed like invoice bills that could be discounted from Italy up to Denmark, for example. And this was part of a network, of a transnational network. At the time, the national states had only like metallic currencies. And then what really happened is that those private bankers started to finance the states. And the states started to issue those redeemable debt certificates. And those debt certificates, these are now what we call paper money, actually.
Right, so central bank liabilities, basically, exactly. Which is the fiat system that we live in.
Exactly.
But then I think the question of Bitcoin is that when Bitcoin came in, the question it asked everybody, at least what I credit them for doing, is to question what is money. So to you, Alexandre, what is money, given the history of money, that the 3,000 years of being gold, now we're in a fully fiat system, unpegged from the gold standard, first in 1930s with Truman, then completely in 1971 with Nixon. Where are we now when it comes to what is money?
Yes, absolutely. This is the key question, Thierry, and thanks for asking it. Actually, for me, money it's quite simple. It is first, it is a store of value. So it enables you to store the result of your work, for example, in a medium that could last throughout the ages. And this was really what we had with the first, gold, silver, monies, and other forms of asset-backed monies. Money is also a medium of exchange for transactions between different people. So it allows you to exchange in a very practical way different goods and services, one against the other, which would be basically possible if you had to, let's say, calculate how many barrels of wine you have to exchange for 1, kilogram of bananas or whatever. So I think these two dimensions are really fundamental. And I think what you mentioned about the politicization of money that is issued by the central banks is that there are some people that are losing confidence in the impartiality of these sovereign bodies and in their capacity to guarantee that these currencies and this money can be a store of value over the long term, because if you issue more and more money, so basically it loses its buying power.
That's right. Well, when studying history, you quickly find out that there is no currency whatsoever, that paper currency or fiat currency that lasts more than 100 years without being completely devalued to zero. But then we also see that. So would you include that money within the principles? I mean, we understand it's unit of accounts, it's a medium of exchange, it's a store of value. It seems to me that fiat currencies make the first two, which is unit of account and medium of exchange. But when it comes to store of value, it kind of defaults on that over the long term, as opposed to gold. Given the broader spectrum of today of money, what would be your money of choice?
Well, I think my money of choice would be a money that would not be used for political reasons. So I would favor a conservative monetary policy that would basically issue the money which is the counterpart of a country's capacity to produce wealth. If you go beyond that capacity, and if you try to issue more money just to reflate the assets that you already have, then you basically debase the money. So I would not trust over the very long term this kind of money. When it comes to gold or silver, the main strength of these gold and silver-based currencies is that there are no liabilities. There are no strings
Correct.
attached, and they are rare. And what makes them valuable is actually the fact that they are rare and that it takes a lot of energy and human work to excavate and to extract, gold from beneath the earth. And actually, it's the same with the cryptocurrencies, like Bitcoin, for example, Ethereum, and others. It takes human work. It takes energy. It takes effort to produce these currencies. It's not infinite. Yeah, you cannot,
Yeah, you touch on a point that is very important, because behind the definition of money, I always used to say, at the end of the day, what you really want is to store energy and time in a proper fashion, and within the everlasting time. I mean, that's why we used to use gold, because of the chemical element was immutable through time. But going back to the principle of things, I understand what you said, and when you touched on a very good point, when you say that money should not be politicized, yet most of the time it is not. But today, we do see free competition of money to a certain extent by the FX rate. So you spoke about conservative approach in monetary policy versus not, and then you would see those currency fluctuations, correct? Yet today, we are reaching the point where currency wars are back in the play, and where you see pegs. For example, I'm in Switzerland, you are in France, and we have the Euro Swiss peg. So are we really in a free market of currencies, in the sense that, we would like to think that it is a free float on the first side, currency to currency. Are we also in a free market when it comes to the price of money? Because the price of money is the interest rate. And the interest rate today, for the Federal Reserve, for the ECB, for the Japanese, for the major central banks, are defined by an FOMC meeting, by a group of people. And even though it used to be the long bond that was kind of free floating according to the market, we now see artificially low interest rate, which is what it is, which is artificial. And you do see central banks stepping beyond their first primary reason of being, which in the case of the ECB, stability of prices, in the case of the US, growth and employment on top. And now we even see Christine Lagarde speaking about climate, or maybe even gender. What do you, so to answer straight, are we on a free market, yes or no? And second, are we not deviating strongly from the first principles of central banking?
Well, thank you. Regarding your first question, I think there are two answers, basically. The first, mostly apparent answer is to say that we are in the free market because these currencies are convertible. You can exchange them one for another whenever and wherever you want. And this is basically the principle on which the system of free money convertibility and free float is based since the collapse of the Bretton Woods system in 1975. But on the more deeper perspective, actually, and this is also my credo, is that the system is not actually a free float system. Actually, we are living in a tiered system in which you have like hegemonic currencies, like the US dollar, for example, and to a lesser extent the euro, and also the yen for a few countries that are in the periphery of Japan. And these hegemonic currencies, they managed to build monetary zones around them. That's the so-called idea of Bretton Woods 2 system, which was debated a few years ago, relatively to the role of the dollar in other countries, as you have pegs in many countries which are pegged to the dollar. Well, in Europe, you have countries that are pegged to the euro as well. And obviously, what happens in the United States, or what happens in the Eurozone through the European central banks is critical for those countries around that are, in a way, they lost their monetary freedom. They are forced to adapt and to apply the same monetary policy because they are very dependent on these markets. So
the exchange rates, yeah.
We are in a tiered system, and there are geopolitical reasons as well. And the obvious example is the United States with the dollar, which is really a currency that is, a global exchange and reserve currency. And this is possible only because the United States has also such a powerful, economy and also military capabilities that they can enforce actually U.S. law and order everywhere in the world, and that's what is being challenged right now.
Right. So stepping in there about the challenge, we do see kind of central banks being forced to adopt new technology pushed by the private sector initiatives, but we also see that major central banks are looking at CBDCs and going a little bit forward. We can imagine most of them, at least they're onto it. They have projects, and we don't know if they're going to materialize or not. But we do see China very aggressively pushing now for the digital renminbi or digital yuan, and then we can expect the US dollar maybe in a theoretical world quite soon to do the same, if not the euro. Within that spectrum, do you think the game will change? Do you think the way those currencies are done will have an impact, wholesale or retail, private or public? And in the long scheme of things, who do you see winning?
Well, I think the rise of CBDCs, first, it should be seen as a technical innovation, because right. It's a way, basically to replace cash in the long run. The idea is that people won't need any more, paper or metallic cash, and cash will be electronic. That's really, I think, the first rationale for CBDCs. And we see that, for example, recently in the Bahamas island, where they issued the sand dollar, which is basically a digital national currency. And really, the official objective is to replace the cash in circulation. And the more they will issue this electronic money, the more they will withdraw from the market the equivalent amount of cash that is circulating. So you see the one-to-one relationship. But I think CBDCs go much beyond that. because they enable also transactions in a faster and much more straightforward way, and they can skip the intermediaries, basically the banks, and allow people, individuals, companies really to exchange money between them without the need to have a banking account. So I think this is the second revolution, is really the revolution in financial services. And for the banking industry, it's a huge challenge. I think it's not currently really reflected in the strategic thinking of many large banks. They see CBDCs, but they don't see the impact. And I think the impact will be tremendous, but it will not come from one day to the other. It will take some time, but once these CBDCs start to be accepted, we will see that with China, perhaps in 2022, when China will host the Olympic Games, and I think they plan to really release the digital renminbi at that time. So this will be really a game changer, and if the experiment is conclusive, then I think this will be circulated more broadly in China, and also it can also fund Chinese initiatives all across the world. And this is the third implication, which is geopolitical. For example, if you take the new Silk Roads, the bridge and the road initiative, basically, which is a Chinese geopolitical and economic project to link many countries and basically to secure its supplies of commodities going forward. The digital renminbi could be, really the kind of new, cement that will put together all these countries around China. So the positive impact and the positive outcome for China will be tremendous if it manages to impose this currency in its transactions all over this geopolitical group of countries.
Right, but when you touch on the Belt and Road Initiative, or Silk Road, whatever you want to call it, and it seems to me that a lot of these countries who are already in the financial system, for some of them, deeply indebted with dollars, and so therefore would have these liabilities towards the US and the political power that comes with it, as being a detonation, right, to the IMF or to other American-controlled institutions. And then on the other side, you have the commercial link with China. Do you think the transition to a bipolar world will be done smoothly, or do you think that the conflict is inevitable?
I think at some point the conflict will be very difficult to escape when you have really two superpowers that are competing. We have seen that during the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And now the difference with China is that China really emphasized its economic power and its the economic opportunities because it implemented some version of market economy, whereas the Soviet Union was only about military power and ideology, which in the long run failed to attract the people around the world and to build a lasting coalition. So
given what you just said,
yeah,
would you bet on the Chinese bloc or the American bloc?
It's difficult to say. I think we will probably see something emerging that will try to accommodate these two blocks. some kind of economic, monetary Cold War, if you like. We are already seeing the economic and the trade Cold War. And I think we will see this monetary Cold War where you have countries that are more, dependent from the United States and others from China. But in the long run, what will determine really the outcome of this competition is the technological capability of either country and its technological advance. And in this regard, what I am seeing now, and I'm not expert on this subject, is that the United States is slightly, losing its technological advance. We are seeing it in R&D budgets. We are seeing it in the number of patents that are still the largest in the world, but their growth is slowing, and China is gaining market share in this area. So at some point, I think if China manages to further its progress in this area, it will become a very serious competitor to the United States. I think there is only.
I agree, and then me coming from Mexico, which has a big dependence on the Americas. Yes. I'm pretty happy to be here in Switzerland as a neutral country and kind of an observer in that sense. And when it comes to money, I have voted with my wallet towards gold, which is also a neutral currency and not a legal tender. But we will see. We will see if there is movements there. Alexandre, we're reaching the end of this podcast. So I would ask you this one last question. What is your important message you would like to transmit, or perhaps your controversial views on a particular subject to our auditors? What would be your main message for the years to come?
Well, I think my main message is to really watch carefully what is really now being developed, especially in China and in other non-Western countries. I think this is where really we are seeing most new things coming. One really big step is, for example, the IPO of Ant Financial Group in Hong Kong and Shenzhen, which would be the largest IPO ever, even surpassing Saudi Aramco's IPO last year. And this is really a taste of things to come, because it shows you that the Chinese authorities, with all their ideology and centralization of power, they managed to give enough space to innovators, and they are innovation friendly actually, and they adopt these new innovations. They are actually leading in the electronic payments revolution, and perhaps tomorrow they will be leading in the CBDCs and in the digital currencies, more broadly speaking.
Well, that's absolutely right. And then what you make me think of is also that I've heard not so long ago at the WEF that information is the new oil, and that it seems to me that the largest IPOs that we are talking about is precisely technology versus oil, and we do see technology taking ahead. So maybe, as you said previously,
it's the future against the past, basically.
So maybe, as you said previously, it probably will be technology that will define the future of the world. Thank you very much, Alexandre. And of course, I will tell the viewers this one thing, that if you want to follow Alexandre, look it up, also the multipolarity report, to know what is coming next. And on that note, I would say goodbye to you, and to the next time.
Thank you, Thierry. Bye.
We will stand on principle, or we will not stand at all.